Mia barely had time to process what she had just heard. The name Ethan Sinclair alone sent a cold shock through her spine. He wasn't just wealthy, he was power personified. A tech mogul, a business strategist, a billionaire who could make or break corporations with a single decision. And she had just spent the last hour humiliating his son. Her hands trembled slightly as she turned back toward first class, her mind racing through every interaction she had had with Jordan. The dismissive tone, the forced politeness, the unnecessary skepticism. Her stomach twisted. She had treated him like an outsider, and now, with all eyes on her, she realized she was the one who didn't belong. Then a deep, measured voice cut through the tension like a blade. "There you are, kid. How's the flight?" Silence rippled through the cabin. Heads turned. Whispers spread like wildfire. Ethan Sinclair himself had entered the first-class cabin. Tall, composed, radiating effortless authority, he strode toward his son, his presence alone shifting the atmosphere. Even the most important businessmen aboard, the ones who commanded boardrooms and controlled billion-dollar deals, stiffened in their seats. Jordan didn't say a word. He simply met his father's gaze, his composure unwavering. Ethan Sinclair's sharp brown eyes swept across the cabin before landing directly on Mia. He didn't ask what had happened. He didn't need to. And in that moment, Mia knew. Her career, her reputation, her entire professional world was hanging by a thread. She opened her mouth to apologize, to explain, to salvage what little dignity she had left. But before she could speak, Sinclair did something far worse than scolding her. He ignored her entirely. Instead, he turned back to Jordan, resting a firm hand on his son's shoulder. "Let's go," he said simply. And just like that, they walked off the plane, heads high, leaving Mia standing there, exposed, humiliated, and utterly powerless. The passengers exchanged glances. Some shook their heads. Others smirked knowingly. Mrs. Holloway took a slow sip of wine, watching Mia with the quiet satisfaction of someone who had just witnessed karma do its job. Mia swallowed hard. For the first time in her career, she wasn't the one in control. She was the one being judged. The first-class cabin exuded quiet luxury, a world apart from the hustle of the airport just beyond the boarding gates. Plush leather seats, each wide enough to stretch out comfortably, gleamed under the soft glow of the overhead lighting. The air smelled of expensive cologne, freshly brewed espresso, and the faintest hint of warm vanilla from the scented towels provided before takeoff. Everything was designed for exclusivity, from the sleek marble countertops at the in-flight bar to the perfectly aligned glasses of champagne resting on polished tray tables. The passengers who occupied these seats were a reflection of this world, each belonging to a rarefied class of wealth and influence. Conversations were hushed but purposeful, murmured between sips of imported wine and the occasional glance at the latest stock updates on gleaming tablets. A well-dressed CEO in his mid-50s, salt and pepper hair impeccably styled, scrolled through emails with a sharp intensity, his manicured fingers tapping briskly against his phone screen. Across the aisle, a woman in a navy blue designer suit flipped through the latest edition of Forbes, her eyes scanning an article on rising global markets while she idly twisted the diamond ring on her left hand. Further down the row, an older gentleman with silver-framed glasses adjusted his reading light, opening a leather-bound notebook filled with precise, handwritten notes, perhaps the final touches on a billion-dollar deal. A businessman, sleeves rolled up, fingers moving swiftly across his laptop keyboard, typed furiously as if every second wasted meant money lost. Flight attendants moved with effortless precision, their smiles practiced and professional, their uniforms crisp and unwrinkled despite the long hours. They catered to their elite clientele with a subtle deference, refilling glasses before they were empty, anticipating needs before requests were made. One poured a delicate stream of sparkling water into a crystal glass, nodding as the passenger barely acknowledged the gesture. Another discreetly adjusted a blanket for an elderly woman who had already drifted into sleep, the pearls around her neck catching the dim cabin light with each gentle rise and fall of her chest. This was not merely a flight. It was an unspoken social order, a silent hierarchy where every passenger carried an invisible currency beyond money: power, connections, influence. The expectation was clear: everyone in this space belonged. They had earned their place not just through wealth, but through legacy, through status, through the quiet, unshakable assurance that they were meant to be here. It was an ecosystem where familiarity bred comfort, and where a single, unfamiliar presence could disrupt the carefully maintained balance. As the last few passengers settled in, conversations resumed. Flight attendants performed their final checks, and the soft chime of the intercom signaled that the aircraft would soon depart for Los Angeles. Another routine flight, another seamless journey for the privileged few. Or so it seemed. No one yet realized that within minutes, an unspoken rule of this exclusive world would be tested in a way none of them expected. Jordan Sinclair stepped onto the plane, his movements smooth and deliberate, his posture upright but relaxed. At 16, he carried himself with a quiet confidence that didn't demand attention, but naturally commanded it. His hoodie was clean, the fabric soft and well-fitted rather than oversized. His jeans were dark and crisp, not sagging, not ripped, just neat. His sneakers weren't designer, but they were spotless, laced up perfectly. He moved with the kind of ease that came from knowing exactly who he was. But in a space like this, where luxury was an expectation, not a privilege, it was also the kind of ease that drew scrutiny. The moment he reached the boarding checkpoint for first class, Mia Parker's practiced smile faltered just slightly, but enough for the keen observer to notice. In her 20 years as a flight attendant, she had developed an instinct for who belonged in these seats. And in her mind, Jordan Sinclair did not. He was too young, too casual, and though she would never say it aloud, too black. Her fingers hovered over the scanner as she stared at the ticket in his outstretched hand. Jordan held it steady, patient, unmoving. He was used to this moment, the second of hesitation that always seemed to come when someone had to process the fact that he was in a space they hadn't expected him to be in. He knew how it went, the slight narrowing of the eyes, the way their brain worked through a list of justifications for why they were skeptical. Mia was doing exactly that now. Her lips pressed together, as if she were debating whether to question him. Her nails, painted a neutral shade of pink, tapped lightly against the scanner before she finally took the ticket from his hand. She looked at the seat number, then back at him. "Flying first class today?" The tone was light, almost polite, but there was an edge to it, a thin layer of doubt wrapped in forced professionalism. Jordan nodded, his expression unreadable. "Yes, ma'am," Mia hummed, her eyes flicking to the boarding screen as if double-checking for an error. Then, with deliberate slowness, she scanned his ticket. The green light blinked. The seat was real. Still, her hesitation didn't leave. For a moment too long, she just stood there, holding the ticket between her fingers as if it might change under further examination. When she finally handed it back, her smile was tight, forced. "All right," she said, stepping aside. "Enjoy your flight."